Hello, everyone. Welcome. Before we kickstart, we'll just wait for a couple more minutes while the late joiners come on board. So hang in there and we'll crack on in about a minute or so. And good afternoon, everyone. And we'll just wait just another minute. We've got a few more that are expecting to join us. Thanks for your patience. We'll be ready to go in a minute. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly research seminar. Good to have you back with us for 2022, supposedly our first year back as normal. But I think we can all agree that at this stage, normal is a little tad too early a call to make. So fingers crossed. But anyway, it's good to have you back. For those of you who I haven't met before, my name is Dave Lamb. I'm the Chief Scientist of Food Agility, and I'll be your MC for this seminar. I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the many lands and waters on which we all live and work. I'd also particularly like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the First Nations owners of the lands where I'm presently based today, which is our new headquarters located in Pitt Street in Sydney. I'd like to pay my respect to elders of all of the many lands and waters, both past, present and emerging. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with Food Agility, we're a CRC dedicated to unlocking the power of digital and data to transform our agri-food sector. Now, before I introduce our speaker, just a quick reminder of some of the housekeeping. Firstly, we are recording the session and ultimately we'll make the recording available back to you. We welcome questions and please use the Q&A tab, not the chat tab, but the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And whilst it's not possible for you to ask questions directly of the presenter yourself, at the end of the presentation, I'll work through those posted on the Q&A with the presenter on your behalf. And of course, if you have a burning desire to follow up directly with the presenter, you can find the details via obviously Google and so forth. Now to our seminar topic. In a New Year survey conducted by Finder this year, 72% of Australians, almost 14 million people, have emerged out from under COVID to set a New Year's resolution. How many make or sustain these desired changes? In a typical year, you'd be interested to know that less than half, and often way less than half, of people who make resolutions to change actually see it through. If individual change is already so hard to do, how can we hope to achieve change at a societal or even an industry sector level? Now, when you consider our CRC's own gig, namely to transform our agri-food sector using the power of data and digital, the task is way harder, way more harder than just having project partners bounce out of bed with a New Year's resolution to be digital, safely declared. Our kind of change is a doing thing, and often a profound doing thing at that. All of our projects, without exception, are multidisciplinary. There are so many dimensions of activating data and digital-enabled change in business. Our mastitis project, and you can find the details on our website where we list all our projects, But our mastitis project, launched in partnership with Dairy Australia, Scholz, DataGene, Sydney University, the University of Technology of Sydney, and Charles Sturt University, seeks to deliver a digital tool to help farmers and vets make better decisions on how they manage mastitis treatment so they can reduce the use of antibiotics and improve animal health. This is a truly multidimensional, multidisciplinary project. All parties recognise from the outset that a solid social science component of work would be needed, not at the end of the project, but as part of the project's DNA to address the many and complex adoption pathways available. And we've all heard of the sayings attributed by many people to many other people. It goes a bit like, to read or be told is to forget, to see is to understand, to do is to know. Well, what happens when you do all three? And it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you today's speaker, Dr. Emma Scholz from Charles Sturt University. Emma is a veterinarian educator, a farmer, and a researcher. Emma's journey to where she is now and into the area in which she now works has been long and varied. But given the complex environment that is our mastitis project, for example, rather than me undertake the daunting task of covering all of the mentions that make Emma and her team so important to this project, I'll leave Emma to introduce herself to you. But I can say one thing, the role of social science in this project, and indeed in our other projects, is absolutely critical. And by the end of this presentation, I trust you'll also understand and appreciate why. So it's a privilege to have you with us today, Emma, and we look forward to hearing more about fostering practice change and the critical role played by social science in multidisciplinary projects. Welcome, Emma.
Thanks very much, Dave, for that introduction. Now I'm just going to share my screen, everybody. Okay. Right, so I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you all. I was thinking about the audience I would be dealing with, and I guess it's possible that there are some actual social scientists in the audience. There's probably also others who have worked with social scientists in more or less happy collaborations. There may be some research students, and we may even have some industry participants. So we've got a pretty diverse audience here. If you're here, though, I'm going to assume that you probably have an interest somewhere in the nexus of agri-food industries, data and technology, research and innovation, and furthermore, that you have an interest in and a curiosity about how to understand, explore, and influence the people on whom all of those amazing innovations depend if they have the impact that we want. At the outset, I should probably say that the title I devised for this talk may imply an unwarranted bigness to my plans for today. So it's probably good for me to resize right now. In 35 minutes plus question time, I'm not going to cover the whole landscape of social science and its intersections with digital agriculture or with natural sciences. So let's talk about my goals. And my goals are that after this presentation, you'll understand more about one researcher, that's me, and my particular approach to social science and interdisciplinarity and practice change. In other words, I'm not trying to show you the whole landscape, but I am trying to show you the view of the landscape through one window, and that might make you interested to actually think about what the view through other windows might look like. And so my second goal leads in from that, and it's that your curiosity and your interest in social science and its promise for your projects will be piqued and triggered so that you'll go out and seek out more information and talking to more people. And so my third goal to bring us back to earth is that while you understand the promise, you're also going to be aware of the challenges. The challenges of working in interdisciplinary groups, the need for careful thinking around collaboration, the need for rigour and ethical responsibilities to your stakeholder groups. So the promise is robust, respectful, and collaborative interdisciplinarity. But I definitely don't want to leave you. I don't want to put rose-tinted glasses on you today. So to start off, to tell you, as Dave said, I do have a very long path to how I got here, and everyone has a story. So I started my career in clinical veterinary practice. I've worked in dairy and mixed and small animal practice. I married a farmer, and so I've been a partner in a farming business for 20 plus years now. In 2005, the university up the road from my farm opened a veterinary school. And so I took on a role teaching veterinary students professional skills, communication, coordinating workplace learning. From there, I undertook my PhD looking at professional identity development. And I, furthermore, in my community roles, I actually act as the chair of a board of our local regional independent day and boarding school. So I guess what I do by telling you that story is I plant my flag as someone who is really all about learning, development and change, but without being restricted by silos or settings or where that learning occurs or what its name is. I guess I also highlight some tensions that sit within and around me around being a generalist and being a specialist. Because whilst I'm happy to draw on really broad sources of knowledge and experience, I'm absolutely not an anything goes type of DIYer. So moving on to this project that Dave introduced, just to give you a really brief overview for those of you who are not familiar with it or maybe don't have any sort of an animal health background. Mastitis is the most significant animal health concern in the dairy industry in Australia and globally. It accounts for the majority of antibiotic use in that industry. It's really costly in terms of dollars for treatment, also loss of production. It's absolutely an animal welfare issue, and it's an issue of antimicrobial stewardship from a One Health perspective. In Australia, antimicrobial drugs are prescription medications, so they're only available for veterinarians, but farmers are largely making the decisions on farm about management of their own mastitis cases. So they're detecting whether the cow has mastitis, making the call on whether to treat or not, what to treat with, whether a case has resolved, and when a cow should be culled or removed from the herd because of the nature or duration of the mastitis problem. So the starting point for our project is the prospect that development of data-driven technologies and or tools could allow reduction in use of antibiotics without compromise to farm productivity or animal welfare. And that the way to do that would be enabling farmers to undertake more targeted mastitis, treatment of clinical mastitis cases. So again, as Dave said, you know, this project has a really diverse group of project partners. As you can imagine, we have really big project meetings. There's expertise in, dealing with big data. There's clinical veterinary expertise with bovine mastitis specialists. There's veterinary epidemiologists. There's machine learning specialists. And my colleague at Charles Sturt University, Associate Professor Jane Heller, and myself are responsible for what we call the farmer-facing dimensions of the project. So the project sits right at the intersection of antibiotic use in mastitis on dairy farms and the use of big data tools for decision support. But absolutely, its success or failure ultimately rests on what farmers do on people, what they do on farm. So it puts our project in the zone covered within this really excellent review article that I'd recommend to anyone who has an interest in the scope and possibilities offered by social science in the space that we're dealing with. And I put the reference to this paper later in on my slides. In moving on to my next section, it's probably fair to give you a warning that I'm going to disappoint you all and say that I don't have the answer in how to achieve practice change using social science. But before you all press the red button, I do have some principles that I think are important to good collaborations and really helpful to success of projects. So my first principle is around being prepared for the discomfort of continually adjusting your focus, both individually and together. And to sort of to highlight what I mean by that, the first area of constant shift is around goals and horizons. And one of the things for interdisciplinary projects to do is around always thinking with the end in mind, but also keeping your eye on what's straight in front of you, and what's next, and preparing to course correct as needed. And one of those discussions to be had in your project teams are around goals for the project. What are we here for? And there can be in any project a lot of answers to that. You know, we can be here to create a cool new tool or a technology. We can be here to create a commercial product. We can be here to advance someone's academic career. We can be here to reduce antibiotic use in the dairy industry, or to allow the voices of farmers to be heard. We may be just staggering to the next milestone. And each of these is a legitimate goal, and often they'll fit together, or they'll have priorities at different times, or they may be in tension with each other. And it's my belief that you can have almost any goal within reason, but you can't have all the goals. You can't have them all at once. And it's really hard to achieve a goal that hasn't been articulated to everyone. So my next principle is around zooming in and out, you know, and thinking as required about the big and the small picture. And so this is often around sort of thinking about impact. We're all under a lot of pressure to think big. You know, we're looking for industry-wide practice change. Funding bodies want us to demonstrate, you know, massive impact and commercialise the next big thing. You know, and especially when we're dealing in the tech sort of sector, you know, we're all in the discourse of moving fast and breaking things and that sort of mode. So I certainly don't feel like I need to make the argument for big picture thinking. We all love it. We're all on board. But I do feel like I need to sort of put my hand up to say, look, sometimes it's the right thing to zoom in to detail, to nuance, to concrete, context-bound, messy detail of actual practice if we want to succeed and make progress. My third principle is around dialogue with project partners and stakeholders. And I mean, it's so obvious as to not need saying about the power of communication, but I think that shifting perspective is harder because we require repeated efforts to really understand people that can be quite different from us and discovering what's of value to them. And that two-way thing of finding out other people's expertise, other people's needs, and what they want from, say, us as social scientists. But then on that other side of it is a giving information where you can broaden the view of others, educate them and let them know what they can and can't expect from us as part of the project. And doing that successfully really requires, you know, empathy, the ability to swap perspectives, and sometimes a fair bit of assertiveness as well. So, you know, all this talk of shifting and refocusing and in and out, you know, it may be making you feel a little bit seasick. And that's why I introduced this section by saying, prepare yourself for discomfort, because it can actually be quite uncomfortable. So in my role as someone who's come from sort of to social science research from a clinical practice, farming practice background, I sometimes feel like I'm walking either on top or sometimes both sides of a nasty looking fence, just exactly like that, where I'm seeking to achieve that balance between intellectual rigour and practical good sense. And I've sort of christened it scholarly pragmatism, which explains why I'm not in marketing, because it's not catchy. But what I mean by that is that when we do what we call science or technology, we've got ways of going about things that distinguish us from, you know, DIY handy people. And there are also ways of going about things in social sciences, you know, and disciplines are one way of codifying, creating traditions, establishing ground rules for membership and sort of understood shared senses of what is rigorous. And look, you know, it's beyond sort of my expertise to really thoroughly critique or defend disciplines. But suffice to say that I'm someone that came to where I am from outside a disciplinary framework. You know, so I came through a you know, professional, clinical, higher education pathway And during that time, I was exposed to really inspiring examples of deep and rich social science-informed explorations. I was also exposed to sloppy examples of half-hearted and cherry-picked appropriation of social science techniques used to sort of reinforce pre-existing understandings and, you know, defend fossilised practices. So what I'm trying to say is that for those of us that don't come with a prefixed disciplinary framework to fall back on, it's important to either take the time to educate ourselves or to draw on the expertise of those that have that knowledge already. But if I'm calling what I do research, or if someone who's calling what they do research, then I have to mean something by that. I have to be addressing one or more answerable research questions. I need to be using some sort of conceptual framework. I need to design and act the research with some sort of ethical responsibility towards the people involved. I need to be able to justify and defend that my conclusions are warranted. So for me, interdisciplinary, whether it's an interdisciplinary team or an interdisciplinary framework that a person is undertaking, it does not mean undisciplined. And I'd like to illustrate just by discussing a few of my favourite things. And the first of those is practice theory as a conceptual framework. And in our work stream, our social science work stream in our mastitis project, after a considerable amount of thought and dialogue with our project partners, we came to view our role in this project as one of practice change and you know, really was one viewed through a practice theory lens. So really I think about our overarching research question as how can on-farm tools to support farmer decision-making foster practice change in the management of clinical mastitis. Now, when I say about using practice theory as a conceptual framework, it's one of my great loves. Practice theory is not just one theory, it's got a collection of variations and foundational theorists. It's really a way of viewing what people do and understanding and researching humans and their activities. It provides ways of conceptualising what people do as organised but changeable networks of relationships, actions, objects and understandings that always have purpose and meaning that are shared between those who undertake them. So one of the key things to understand about practices is that they have an existence outside the heads of individual people, and they have dimensions that are historical over time, that are cultural, that exist in relations, and that also take into account things. And when I say things, I mean cows and milking machines and all those sorts of things that get in the way or help you or enable change. So if I'm thinking through a practice theory lens and I'm undertaking a project about practice change on dairy farms, I'm more interested in, say, uncovering how the physical setup on the farm or in the milking parlour might shape what a farmer is able or willing to do. I'm more interested in a story about how they tried something new that did or didn't stick and why or why not, than I am in, popping out a questionnaire to 5,000 farmers. Where possible, I want to actually get on farm, observe milking, see what happens, ask why. Putting out questionnaires to thousands of farmers is not a problem. That's a legitimate research approach. It's just one that, for me, doesn't address the research questions I have. Whenever I see responses to a questionnaire, I find myself looking at the answers and saying, so tell me more about why you started doing that, or give me an example of what you mean when you say that. And those pieces of paper, they just never answer me. They give me nothing back. So one of the things, I guess, about practice theory that I love, and that is also, I guess, one of its frustrations, is that it overturns the individualistic worldview that we all adopt as a matter of habit and course. So that idea we have that making decisions about mastitis is something that occurs inside the head of an individual farmer, because that that idea gives us then the notion that the solution means changing something inside the head of that individual farmer. Whereas thinking through a practice theory lens, your ideas about what could change or why things may or may not work are so much more broad than just that idea of thinking about what's some knowledge in someone's head. So if you ever want to know more about practice theory, and I absolutely believe you should want to, I do cite a key reading at the end of my slides. And my perspective is, once you see the world in terms of networks of social practices, you can't unsee it. Okay, so I now want to just do a brief ode to qualitative research. I think you've probably seen from what I've just talked about that I'm an advocate for qualitative methods in and of themselves, not just as an adjunct or precursor to quantitative methods. I'm happy to conduct quantitative or mixed methods research, no problems at all, but I just want to make the following points about qualitative methodologies. There are certain research questions that lend themselves to qualitative exploration rather than quantitative methods. And they tend to be the sorts of questions that I find most interesting. You know, they're questions about how do people come to do things the way they do? What's it like to be a certain sort of person, whether that's a dairy farmer or a data scientist? How do people understand what's going on in the world around them, and you know, how does that influence them? So to answer those sorts of questions, I need to get in close to people, directly engage with them, talking to them, watching what they do in the places that they do them. Doing research like this has its own traditions and practices, and if you want to undertake it, take time to explore and find out more about it. A couple of the big sticking points, I guess, for those more familiar with quantitative research when they think about or engage with qualitative research, sticking points about sampling. Sampling strategies are different for qualitative research. You're almost never looking for a representative sample. Instead, you have different strategies that may be maximum diversity, critical case sampling. There are a number of strategies. And I guess the other big sticking point is around establishing the rigour of research. The quality criteria are different. Generalisability is often not what we're necessarily aiming for, but a good quality qualitative project should actually spell out what its quality criteria are. How can its rigour be judged? One note, I guess, and this goes for any sort of human-centred research, there are really complex ethical decisions and dimensions about engaging with research participants directly and deeply. And by that, I guess I mean that asking and allowing people to speak for themselves about their experiences and their own practices is a really different activity to putting a questionnaire into their hand. The voice is different in each case, and so the responsibility for making decisions about that sort of research is an ethical one. So that's something to take in mind if you're thinking of undertaking qualitative research. So let's move on to thinking about social science and how its outputs can be used and evaluated by project partners. I talked before about dialogue, and this is one of the things, I guess, to come up with sort of upfront, you know, what can project partners expect from social scientists? Because one of the risks is exactly this, you know, the social scientist is all excited, look at these findings, they're really cool, and the rest of the project team are going, what? And I guess I draw a little bit of a parallel of a trap that we can all get caught in when we're doing these sorts of projects, is that we've created a lovely new tool that we love and look at our stakeholder group going, what? So talking about open communication about goals and outputs and so on is something that project teams need to work with, whether they're interdisciplinary or not. So illustrating a little bit about the previous points, this rather busy slide that you don't really have to engage with was my effort to enact some of those principles that I talked about with our research team up the front of our project. I sort of kind of mapped out what we had planned for our social science stream, and that's in that blue column, mapped against what I understood our project partners in the orange column to be going to do. I talked about our activities, what our processes would be, and I put little blue boxes, the ones in the red circle, which would give what the outputs are that they could expect from us. So we're at early stages now. We're not even a full year into this 3-year project. And so that diagram will get revisited and rejigged and reviewed. But it's just that idea of creating something around which you can dialogue and understand from each other what you're doing and how it all fits together. To give you a really brief overview of what I've been able to share with our project colleagues at this stage, as on the previous slide, you'll notice that I suggested that I was going to identify key focus areas and a bit of a principles of clinical mastitis management. So at this stage, they've had from us some early thematic analysis, which you can see on the left side of the slide there, plus a report about some key focus areas that we would profit from further exploring with our participants. So just as a bit of an example, an early theme that we've had from some interviews I did with farmers, I identified the importance of routinized practice, okay, so for practices. So, in unique ways in each enterprise, routine practices reflected patterns of sort of people and cows and machinery and environment. They were a way that farmers and their staff managed complexity, managed the multiple demands and resource constraints that were on them. The routines, they're neither inherently good nor bad. They can become fossilized and habitual, but they actually also are just a way of managing life. So that was something that was important to note. An example of a focus area that I put in our report was around the fact that farmers had perspectives and priorities that we might not have expected around the timing of mastitis treatments that could contribute to the success or otherwise of a treatment decision support tool. So from those two little examples, so what does that mean for the project? So I guess from our point of view, we would advise that the concept of routinized practices suggests that introducing a change either needs to fit into existing routines or provide a compelling argument that the routine is to be upset. And that applies whether we like the routine, whether we think it's a good one or not. You have to sort of make a decision on that. And the idea, as well as actually informing the development of a tool, that's the sort of the goal of the project, from our social science perspective, really a richer conceptual picture of farmer mastitis decision-making practices. Absolutely, it can inform the practice change strategies within this project, but we also believe that, rigorously conducted and conceptually well underpinned, it's got wider relevance, beyond this project. Okay, earlier I definitely promised no rose-tinted glasses, and so, here's a grim quote, and that certainly points to the risks we face when we embark on ambitious innovation projects. I don't really see it as a reason for despair, because the flip side of risk is opportunity, and some of those burning wrecks light the way to success and new possibilities. So look, my conclusion is, that if we've got a great innovation and we need some social science and we're asking where does it fit, my answer is anywhere and everywhere. I don't see it as a guarantee of success. I don't see it as a guarantee of not creating another burning wreck, but I do believe that it's ethical, that it's intellectually rigorous and represents the accountability to end users that we all are seeking. This is the highest hill on our farm, and it's a place I really love. And today I feel like I've told you about my own research hill, which is a good place to be. It's not the only place to be. I've taken a lot of trouble to educate and train myself, and I've taken trouble today to spell out my position and my perspective and my research interests. look, I think that in any interdisciplinary team, that's an important task to do. I think it really matters as a researcher to tell your story. I think as a member of a team, it's important to be prepared for emergence, for complexity, and to watch out for paradigm collisions, to be flexible and decide which hill you're going to die on. Partnership across disciplinary divides is really difficult, but it's really potentially rewarding. But I would remind you that partnership involves end users as well if it's going to really be effective. And I guess here's my sort of practice theory sting in the tail. As innovators, if we want to effectively change the practices of others, we really need to remain open to changing our own practices. And that's a little more confronting. Okay, so as promised, there's some homework if you're interested from some experts in various fields. And look, I'd be really happy to entertain questions, comments, and discussion. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Emma. And thank you all to the listeners as well. The questions are coming in, and Emma, you won't be disappointed. And look, I think what was particularly noteworthy and appreciated was the fact that the Mastitis project enlivens all of those frameworks and, if you like, pillars that you bring to bear. So, and a lot of questions that have come in, which we'll just spend a few minutes on now, really reflect that. So, first of all, and just for everyone's information, I first heard Emma speak in the Mastitis showcase, and as you know, we run quarterly showcases for all our projects. And one of the questions that we got onto at the end was whether or not there'd be interest in forming a community of practice, because we have so much to learn from our colleagues, including Emma, of course, in this space. And there was a question from one of our audience, is there a community of practice for more qualitative social science research and for researchers in ag, digital ag space? And I guess there's a hidden question behind it, is would you be willing to be part of it or not?
So look, it's a very good and timely question, and actually I've been really excited about the last 6 months at Charles Sturt. One of my colleagues has actually started up a community of practice called Social Scientists in Science, and almost all of them are based in ag or ag-related fields. So it's an emerging space, absolutely. Yep. And it's a really interesting one because, you know, and it's where that disciplinary / interdisciplinary, and most of the people in that community of practice have come, as I have, outside that disciplinary framework, you know, because people that have come up within disciplinary frameworks, whether it's sociology, psychology, whatever, they often tend to identify and, you know, have their little community within there, whereas those of us who haven't can kind of remain orphans until we sort of find each other.
Well, I guess for myself, I guess I'm really keen to work with, for example, Emma, for everyone, and see if we can start to bring something together, because just the interest in this seminar and the nature of the questions flowing, I think there's an appetite for it. So thank you for that, Phil. Now, look, I've got a couple of what appear to be technical questions, but I really welcome this. So first of all, the relationship between qualitative, quantitative and mixed methods. Is there, for example, in the Mastitis project, you have a certain balance? Have you got, from an experience perspective, I guess, some I guess not necessarily rules of thumb, but some thinking around, you know, what's best for what when you confront a project like this?
Glad you asked. Okay, so the answer is it depends. And the answer is it depends, look, and to a large extent, it depends on what research question you are asking as to what the methods are that will best answer that. But more broadly than that, it's around your philosophical framework, which is your view of knowledge, how you're going to use the knowledge that you develop, and making sure that the questions you ask, the methods you use, the findings you have are congruent and make sense, each in light of each other. And those can be really quite difficult conversations in big teams where if you're looking for, so let's talk about, if I'm talking about, trying to understand the experiences of dairy farmers, and I've got somebody who says, well, I want a representative sample of the experiences of dairy farmers. And I will say, well, there is no, that's not something I can give you. So yeah, it's an ongoing discussion, and that there is no best. Those of us that are pragmatists will usually use the tool that seems best for the job. We'll tend to have favourites, but yeah, it's not easy to answer.
And I guess that makes it, for those of us that are less experienced or have no experience in this but want to deploy this, understanding, how to build the social scientific approach to this. And for example, in the mastitis project, it strikes me there's a combination of two things, Emma. You've got findings as an outcome of the project that you want to document and communicate and obviously understand, but you want to apply this back into the project live. So does that throw up even additional challenges in terms of your approach to designing your inquiries?
And again, that's about that shifting back and forwards and being comfortable with that sort of constant seasick inducing motion of thinking about, absolutely, feeding just into the project, also feeding more broadly. Yes.
One more, what appears to me technical anyway, is practice theory similar to participant observation method?
So participant observation method is a data collection method from a sort of tradition of ethnography or anthropology. So it's a tool it's a data collection tool that you would use. Practice theory is sort of a sensitizing framework, so in the same way that somebody might use, other mastitis researchers overseas have used, the theory of planned behaviour, which is a psychological theory, and that informs how you're going to conduct your research. So you may use participant observation as a method within a study that's informed by practice theory. So practice theory, one of the annoying things about it is that it doesn't have sort of prescribed methods. Here's how you go about a practice theory a project. You have to work it out yourself.
Great. And I just want to take the opportunity to introduce, Carol Richards, Associate Professor from QUT, one of our food agility family. Welcome, Carol. I posted a comment in the chat box for everyone to note, so I'll read it out anyway. If the Australasian Agrifood Research Network could be the platform for this community of interest. It's a multidisciplinary social science network with, according to Carol, massive international support from some of the global heavies like Professor Phil McMichael, Michael Carroll and others. So there is a link, everyone, in the chat if you'd like, and thank you, Carol. I've got a couple of questions that have come in by text, would you believe? So if you do have questions, thanks for the smiley face, Carol, I'm watching. Please drop them under the Q&A tab. Here's a couple of practical questions, I guess. When you're building a project with that adoption, sort of that keen eye on adoption, effective adoption, what are the warning signals that a project is or has lost traction with its stakeholders? What are the sorts of signals you've got your antenna up for?
I think that having trouble recruiting participants or getting engagement from participants can be a little bit of a signal. That can also be a signal that you're asking the wrong thing of them or engaging with them in the wrong way, but sometimes it means that you're actually, seeking to answer a question they're not asking.
Okay, so if they're talking to you, it's okay. If they stop talking to you, that's a problem.
Well, as long as they're talking to you, it can be rescued.
Yes, so it doesn't matter what they're saying or how bad it could be. And believe me, this is a journey I live in my existence. At least they're talking to you.
They say that the opposite of love is not hate; it's indifference. And so I guess that's works for research projects as well.
Indeed, thank you. Now here's the one. So you've evoked an image, a bit of an image of the project, mastitis project, for example, as a bit of a journey. And you spoke of your primary principles when approaching project design and delivery. And I guess just flipping the question, I guess I just asked you, can you give us examples of the small things that make a difference in a successful and self-sustaining project journey with those very stakeholders whom you want to influence? What are the sort of the hallmarks or the early signs that the project's up and running and will likely run?
So, I mean, it depends on whether we're talking about the signs within the project team or the signs external to the project team, so with participants and so on. What are the signs that it's going well? Yeah, you know, and I guess I'd probably give a counterintuitive response, which says that everyone feeling comfortable and happy and cheerful doesn't necessarily mean that everything's going well. So, you know, it may sometimes well be that actually discomfort and, you know, creative discord could actually be a sign of things going just fine. So if I can give a negative answer to that, that would be it.
So almost communication traffic. You know, if there's good traffic.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's, you know, and certainly in recent years, you know, and I mean, this mastitis project got up and running. I have met in person only the people I already knew from this project, you know, because it's all been undertaken under COVID conditions, you know, and so, you know, I mean, do the old rules apply? Yes, to some extent, but yeah, that adds a whole new level of complexity to that idea about dialogue and relationship building and all of those things that we thought we knew.
Yeah, okay, thank you. In your conversation piece around practice theory, you sort of implied, you know, stakeholders are an organised but changeable network. You know, consider them as a network rather than just an individual. I love these questions, Amber. I'm not making them up. They are coming quick and fast. So I noticed. So can you give us a practical example of how you identify in a network those key interaction points or the influences that could precipitate that change process? What is the role of influences and how do you sound them out, dig them out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, and I certainly see policymakers in agriculture these days are very heavily into influences and, you know, targeting particular groups. I'm not sure that I'm an expert on that. What I would say is that one tool that can be really powerful in facilitating practice change is actually, and I'm thinking of an angle that we're sort of thinking of, I have in my head for a next phase of the project, is identifying examples of success and really exploring those maybe in a qualitative case study sort of format, and just really deeply understanding what succeeds, why does it succeed. I don't necessarily, you know, I believe that network building, social network building is really important for practice change. I'm not so certain about the importance of the key person. I'm not so sure that the quality of a network and its collective learning and so on is really dependent on that, you know, charismatic leader type of capability. Sometimes it is, but it can also build weak networks, because when that person is gone, then the network can collapse.
Thank you. Question from Ed up in Armidale. Nice to see you again, Ed. I guess, you know, talking about our connections that enable this sort of multidisciplinary collaborative approach, and obviously the key role of social science in this being brought in from the get-go. Any advice for some of our researchers looking to build those sorts of connections? I mean, you know, you don't find people like yourself on every street corner, Emma, as in figuratively speaking, of course.
Yeah, no, but there are lots of people around with really good expertise, you know, that would lend itself to different projects in different ways. How do you find them? I don't really know. That's not something I can it's not something I can easily answer. I mean, I probably would say that, you know, and one of my things is that whilst I don't hold farmers and end users up on a pedestal, but I would say that there's a good deal of expertise and you know, positive contributions to projects that actually can come from industry. So, you know, I think we're really undercooked, not you know, broadly as a society on how well we engage users, you know, and that's because it's difficult. It requires practice change that's almost impossible for current institutional arrangements and funding arrangements and so on. But I think it's a really untapped resource.
Awesome, thank you. And I should point out that, fingers crossed, that both Emma and Carol and that sort of quality of colleague in our organisation should hopefully be at our summit in the middle of the year at Charles Sturt University. So if you want to come and meet some real live social scientists and get some good practical tips, come along to Wagga in the middle of the year. And look, it looks like we've got no more questions. Thank you, everyone, for your energetic questioning. And thank you, Emma, for a really thought-provoking presentation. Now, feel free to reach out to Emma directly. Emma has an adjunct appointment at Charles Sturt University, so there is a csu.edu.au email that you should have no problems finding. And also, don't forget, we're going to be releasing a recorded version of the seminar in the coming days. Now, keep your eyes open for the next seminar, which we'll be locking in the next couple of weeks. But also, as I mentioned earlier, note we've got our big annual Food Agility Summit at Charles Sturt University in Wagga on 1 and 2 of June. Absolutely come along. We're all busting to get out from under the COVID rocks, and we should all be there, including hopefully Emma and Carol and a few others as well. There will be an evening networking event, a postgraduate student day, a whole raft of presentations and panel sessions, and also a field event out on the recently launched Global Digital Farm, which is a wonderful canvas and a green space to really dare to dream about what our hands-free farming future could look like. And you can find details about the summit scheduled for the 1st and 2nd of June in Wagga on the Food Agility website. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next month at our seminar series. And thanks again, Emma, for your contribution.